Chapter 2391. It was to accuse her of being a two-faced person. Cameron was supposed to introduce Minzy to Waylon and make them a couple, but she ended up falling for her friend's man and said that it was a fair competition. Because of that comment, everyone started speculating that the Miss Southern in question was the female guest who had shown up on the variety show with Waylon. Some of the more rational netizens said that Cameron did nothing wrong. Minzy and Waylon weren't dating, so it was a fair competition. However, some netizens thought that Cameron was deceitful because she was supposed to help Waylon and Minzy get together but ended up falling for him and stealing him. That wasn't considered competing fairly. She had just tricked her friend. The people who watched the talk show suddenly lost their interest in Cameron and turned into haters. In the end, the truth about Cameron pretending to be a man for over 2 decades on the East Islands was exposed. People were saying that she might have been sleeping around because she was surrounded by men, that she might be promiscuous, and that the Southerns were gangsters. The news that broke out online quickly got to Waylon. Leonardo looked into the poster's ID and found information about the person who started the rumor. It was from a fake account created not long ago, and the poster's location wasn't in Bassburg but in the Kong ports instead. Waylon frowned and stared at the monitor. "Sir, should I contact the president who's overseas and ask him to help us suspend the account?" "No," Waylon said calmly. "Even if we suspend it, a new one will pop up." He leaned back on his chair. "Find out who the poster is, and see who this is linked to." Leonardo was surprised. "Are you saying that?" Waylon had a blank expression. "If I suspect something, I need to find out." Leonardo nodded. "Yes, sir." Meanwhile, at the Goldman mansion, Titus, who was carrying Charm, looked annoyed when he found out about the rumors online. Have the netizens lost their minds? How could the Southerns be gangsters? Nolan, who was sitting on the couch, flipped the page of the newspaper. "Aren't you unhappy about that great-granddaughter-in-law?" Titus glared at him. "Did I ever say that?" Nolan smiled. "I guess you've accepted them? If people criticize her, it means that my great-grandson has bad taste. I can't have that." Titus smirked. "How could you not say anything as the father? You're just going to let your son and daughter-in-law be criticized like that?" Nolan folded the paper. "Z and I faced a lot of criticism in the past too, and we managed to survive. If they can't even deal with this, how will speaking up help them?" The old man clicked his tongue. "You're not paying enough attention to your children. Neither do you." Titus thought that if he continued arguing with his grandson, he might just die of a heart attack. He picked up his phone and gave Morrison Shaw a call. "Get me a Twitter account." Morrison was half awake and was still sleepy. "Why do you need that? Why do you care?" Quickly. "I need to reprimand some netizens." He then hung up. Morrison scratched his head. The old man was going to argue with netizens on Twitter? He still got him an account, and Titus immediately handed Charm to the nanny, then started arguing with the fans. He wasn't an antique and was pretty up-to-date with the terms. He typed quickly and used online terms very well. Chapter 2392. Titus told everyone that he was Waylon's great-grandfather, but no one believed him. Some even mocked him. He angrily used his son's identity to verify his account. After ex-chairman and founder of Black Gold were added to his profile, people who questioned and mocked him died away. At the same time, Leonardo found the poster's identity and even found their number. The person was obviously shocked to find out that they were being investigated. They contacted Minzy to extort money from her, or they would speak. Minzy was annoyed at the audacity of that person, threatening her. "What do you mean? I've already given you 100,000? The person pressed on. "That's not going to be enough. They found me, Miss Holland." "You have a lot of money, so what is 100,000 more?" Minzy gasped. "They found him?" She clenched her jaw. "Sure, I'll give you 100,000 more, but if you dare snitch on me, you won't get away once I get back to the Kong ports." The person was relieved to get paid. Don't worry, 100,000, and I'll get rid of any evidence linked to you. She transferred the money over. Unfortunately, she never could have thought that the receipt was sent to Leonardo. This is the money that she paid me, Mr. Pritchard. What you promised is true, eh? Leonardo knew that the man was just greedy. He didn't expect him to immediately rat Minzy out by promising to pay him double the amount. It was probably something Minzy never expected, either. He smiled, then said on the phone. Don't worry. Mr. Goldman follows through with his promises. We'll get back to you in 2 days. Leonardo hung up and turned around. Sir, the person who ordered him to do it was indeed Miss Holland. No one could have thought that Minzy would do that to Cameron. She was just digging her own grave. Waylon wasn't surprised at the result of the investigation. From the moment that he had suspicions, she was on the list of suspects. That was because he knew what had happened on the East Islands best. Minzy had been at the East Islands at that time too. He had used Minzy to test Cameron, so he wasn't very interested in getting Minzy involved in this. It was mainly because he felt guilty because he used her. If Minzy needed help with the partnership, he would do as much as he could, but she shouldn't have tried to ruin Cameron's reputation online. Waylon raised his brows. Speak to Mr. Holland and show him the evidence. Leonardo nodded. At the hotel. Minzy was oblivious to the fact the other party had betrayed her. She read the comments that were attacking Cameron and was feeling content. She wouldn't let Cameron be with Waylon. No way. She refused to believe that Cameron would keep calm when she saw what was going on online. How could the Goldmans accept a daughter-in-law who had been dressing up as a man for years and was rumored to have a messy sex life? She heard the doorbell ring and got up to get the door. She didn't see who was standing outside, but the next instant, a hard slap made her turn her face. She touched her face in shock until she saw her furious father. Dad. Her father had never hit her in her life. She was shocked and sad. Malin walked into the room and tossed his phone on the table. Look at what you've done. Minzy shuddered and picked up the phone. The message included her chat history and the receipt of her wire transfer. Chapter 2393. That person had told her father. Minzy clutched her phone and tried to explain. Dad, it's not what you think. I was forced to do it. Seeing Minzy didn't apologize immediately and still tried to come up with excuses, Malin was enraged. He controlled his anger, pinched the bridge of his nose, and questioned her. You call this being forced? Minzy, when did you turn into a ruthless person? How could you create rumors about the Southerns? Minzy's face turned pale as she noticed the disappointment in her father's eyes. I was just... She then broke down in tears and tugged at her father's hand. Dad, I admit that I wasn't thinking straight, but I really like him. Nonsense. Malin slapped her hand away, pointed his finger, and said, Since when do we Hollands need to stoop so low? You would do anything just to get a man? Minzy started sobbing. Am I wrong for pursuing my love? Malin's face dropped, and he looked pretty worried. Had she turned out this way because he was too busy and had neglected his daughter? He took a deep breath, then looked down. Follow me back to the Kong ports tomorrow. Minzy froze, because she didn't think that he would want to bring her back. No, I won't go back. Minzy knelt down at his feet. Dad, I'm sorry. Please don't send me back. I can't go back. I need to stay by him for a chance. He smiled sadly. Do you really think that you have a chance? Of course I do. If Cameron backs out, I will get my chance. I really like Wayne, and I don't want to give up, she sniffled while the tears rolled down her cheeks. Malin closed his eyes tightly, and after a long pause, he clenched his jaw. You don't have a chance, Minzy. She shook her head. No, that's not possible. He's already married to Cameron. Why would you still have a chance? Malin looked at her and saw the shock, disbelief, and madness in her eyes. No. That's impossible. How could they be married? No way. Malin grabbed her shoulders and said in a low voice. They're official, but what are you? Minzy, are you going to abandon your status and be the other woman in someone's relationship? Do you think Wayne doesn't know about what you've done? I got the message because Leonardo from the Black Gold Group came to see me. It was what Wayne wanted. Minzy froze on the spot, and her face was pale as a corpse's. Malin let go of her, calmed down, and warned her. Follow me back to the Kong ports tomorrow. If you refuse, I'll disown you. He wouldn't have threatened his daughter if he wasn't disappointed. After he left the room, Minzy fell to the floor and cried her eyes out. This wasn't the ending that she was expecting. The next day, Cameron and Waylon attended a press conference to give a statement about the scandal. Waylon turned to look at Cameron and held her hand. Every reporter there saw it. One of them asked, Mr. Goldman, are you dating Miss Southern? No, replied Waylon, and the place turned quiet. Then he slowly continued. We're married now, and I'd like to announce that we're husband and wife officially. Chaos ensued. Chapter 2394. The reporters pointed their cameras at Cameron. Miss Southern, is it true? Are you married? She pressed her lips together and nodded. Yes. The reporter continued. I heard that you're the daughter of Mr. Sonny Southern from the East Islands and used to live there dressed up as a man. Why did you do that? Cameron looked at the reporter and replied. Is that not allowed? The reporter choked, then smiled awkwardly. It is, but you're a girl and pretended to be a man for over 20 years. Don't you think it's a bad idea? Cameron smiled. Are you being sexist? The sharp question threw the reporter off, and he was stumped. Cameron continued. I did live with a bunch of men while dressed up as a man, but my father is a man too. The East Islands are quite a chaotic place. My father hid my identity to protect me. I lived with them for over 2 decades, and other than being a little rough around the edges and unruly, they're kind, honest, and loyal. Why would my gender matter? Are you saying that, to you, dressing up as a man and living with my family and friends is immoral? It was so quiet there after her answer that one could hear a pin drop. Cameron looked down. You've slandered me, and I can deal with that, but I can't accept you doing that to my father and the Southern clan. We've never done anything illegal and unacceptable. Even when my father traveled around the globe and settled down in Southeast Eurasia, he never brought trouble, didn't extort money, and didn't give out loans at ridiculous rates. He treats the people in our clan as well as he can and is lenient to his friends. I don't wish to hear any more slander or someone attacking my family. After Cameron finished speaking, the reporters started clapping, but the one who had asked looked awkward. Waylon turned to look at Cameron. Cameron also turned to look at him, then raised her brows and smiled. He held her hand and looked toward the reporters. Do you have any more questions? We'll answer them as a couple. After the news was posted online, the people questioning them were silenced. Most of the netizens supported Cameron. After the news about their marriage broke out, the previous rumors were quashed. After Titus argued with Twitter users for 3 days, he got into trending and started getting fans. They all thought he was the old man who was worried about his grandson. Minzy, sitting in the airport lounge, saw the news and was devastated because her hard work had turned into a joke. At Emperon, Cameron lay in bed and was so tired she didn't want to move. Waylon leaned against the door. Food? I'm tired. She was too lazy to move. Waylon smiled, walked over to her, and picked her up. Cameron put her arms around his neck. What are we having? You'll find out. Waylon carried her down the stairs, and a familiar aroma floated toward them. She immediately jumped out of his arms and ran to the table. Barbecued ribs? She turned her head. You made this? Waylon raised his brows. Of course. She picked one up, took a bite, and immediately gave a thumbs up. Not bad. Waylon pulled out the chair, took a seat, and pulled Cameron into his arms. Cameron was surprised and turned to look at him. What? Chapter 2395. Waylon played with her hair. Go ahead. Cameron was a little uncomfortable. How would she be able to eat when she's sitting on his lap? She picked up a rib, but her neck felt ticklish before she could take a bite. She chuckled and pushed her elbow into his chest. Wayne, enough. Waylon rested his chin on her shoulder and lazily said, when the pig is fat enough, I'll be able to eat her. Cameron blushed and chuckled. Who are you calling a pig? He moved closer to her ear and whispered, Piggy Cam. Cameron was going to playfully hit him when Waylon grabbed onto her wrist, cupped her face, and kissed her. They got back to the room, and their sweaters came off and slid down the side of the bed. Waylon was on top of her when she accidentally touched his chest, feeling the warmth through his shirt. Cameron pulled her hand back, but Waylon seemed to expect that and grabbed her hand. It's too late to back down now. Waylon pinched her chin and kissed her lips. A surge of emotions and feelings rolled in. It ended after who knew how long. Waylon pulled Cameron into his arms, moved the hair stuck to her neck away, and kissed her forehead. She was finally his. Cameron slept for the longest time, and the lights were already on when she woke up. She turned around and said with a hoarse voice, Wayne. He had just gotten out of the shower and heard her calling his name. You're up? She buried her face in the pillow and whispered, I need some water. He poured her a glass of warm water and sat at the edge of the bed. Cameron still didn't look at him. Leave it on the table. Waylon leaned in. Do you need me to feed you? Cameron glared at him. Go away. He smiled. I'm here to stay. Her ears turned red, so Waylon stopped teasing her, left the glass on the table, and asked where else was sore. She clenched her jaw. Shut up. Her stomach started to growl after saying that. Waylon wrapped her up in a blanket and carried her. Cameron rested on his chest, placed her head on his shoulder, and said, I can walk. He rested his chin on the top of her head. Are you sure? Cameron didn't reply. She wasn't sure, but she knew that she probably couldn't stand. Waylon carried her into the walk-in closet and picked up some of her innerwear. Cameron sat on the chair and took them with even more shyness. Go out. All right, I'll wait for you in the living room. He walked outside and closed the door. Cameron changed and walked down the stairs. Waylon was preparing supper in the kitchen. Soon, there was a warm bowl of udon on the table. Cameron sat down and saw love bites clearly around his collar. She looked away, then picked up her fork and started eating. Waylon watched her while resting his head on his fist, his eyes filled with happiness. The next day, Cameron woke up from Waylon's kiss. She squinted lazily, weakly pushed him away, and grumbled, enough. They had spent a lot of time in bed, so she would like to get more sleep. Waylon chuckled and kissed the corner of her eyes. Your father called you this morning. She immediately sat up. Dad? He nodded and played with her hair. I picked it up. Cameron asked anxiously. What did he say? Waylon looked at her face. You've been in Bassburg for a while now. Do you want to go back and visit him? Chapter 2396. Cameron lowered her head. She would lie if she said she did not want to return. I'll come with you. What about your company? She asked. Waylon chuckled. My father and grandfather are here. They'll take care of the company. Cameron's eyelashes fluttered. She did not know what to say. Waylon placed his lips close to her cheek and said, I'll give you 10 minutes to clean yourself up and go downstairs to have breakfast. If not. He turned her over and looked down at her. I won't let you get off the bed. All right. All right, I'll get up now. Cameron pushed him away and rushed into the washroom. She might need to sleep until the afternoon if they did that again. By the time she had finished cleaning herself up, Waylon had already put on casual attire and was sitting in front of the table enjoying his coffee. There was some breakfast on the table as well. Cameron pulled out a chair, sat down, and took a piece of toast. Perhaps she had used too much energy last night, so she was hungry right now. When are we going back? He lifted his eyelids and said, this afternoon. I've already bought the tickets. But why did my dad suddenly call me back? Asked Cameron. After all, he was the one who wanted her to stay in Bassburg, and she was certain that he must be up to something no good for calling her back. Waylon let out a smile and replied, who knows? Meanwhile, in the Eastern Islands, Sunny was instructing the maids and butlers in the courtyard. The people in the kitchen were busy preparing food while the others were decorating the courtyard. Soon, what came into view was a pretty and majestic wedding hall that followed the Eastern Islands traditions. He pointed at a maid who was putting up a decoration and said, hey, you have put it the wrong way. Take it down and put it up again. Yes, Mr. Southern. The maid took down the decoration before putting it back on. The entire household was heavily decorated according to the Eastern Islands traditions. When Damien came into the courtyard, he couldn't help but exclaim, whoa. I thought I entered the wrong house. Mr. Southern, are you having a wedding soon? Sunny chuckled happily and said, my daughter and my son-in-law have already gotten their marriage certificate. Of course, we're going to have a wedding. If Mahina had not shown him the news yesterday, he wouldn't have known that they had already announced their marriage. He was very happy about it, so he called them this morning and told them to come back. He wanted to give them a surprise. Damien laughed and teased him. It seems like we must keep the wedding celebrations for at least 3 days and nights. Definitely. I'll have a lot of tasks for you, Zuvilla, very soon. Sure. We'll be standing by for your order, Mr. Southern. While they continued decorating, Waylon and Cameron had just gotten onto the ship. Cameron changed into a man outfit and put on a wig. Suddenly, she heard a woman talking to Waylon in the corridor. She opened the door and saw that woman. She was wearing a leopard print super short skirt, a mink coat, and heavy makeup. Apparently, she was trying to hook up with Waylon as she was standing very close while talking to him. Sir, I just tripped myself. Are you not going to help me? After she finished her sentence, she leaned on to Waylon. Cameron clicked her tongue and walked over. Putting her arm on Waylon's shoulder, she looked at her. Really? Do you need my help? The woman was stunned. After sizing up Cameron, she chuckled and said, boy, you're too young. I'm not into someone who's younger than me. The smile on Cameron's face disappeared as she said, what a coincidence. I don't like old women either. The woman's expression changed. Who are you calling an old woman? Cameron chuckled and said, given your age, you could even be my mother. After that, she turned to Waylon and said, what's wrong, big fellow? Are you into an old woman like her? Chapter 2397. Waylon narrowed his eyes as he looked at Cameron. It seemed to him that Cameron was being jealous again. The woman sneered and said, sir, is he your friend? He looks like a sissy. Are you sure your sexual orientation is all right? Cameron's face sank. Before she could say anything, Waylon grabbed her into his arms and said, that's right. I like someone like him. Ugh, you guys are sick. The woman chided before storming away. Cameron turned around to glare at Waylon. She pushed him away and said, you have a lot of unwanted romantic encounters. Waylon lifted her chin. Are you mad, Cam? Don't be silly, replied Cameron. There's no way I'd be jealous of an old woman like her. Waylon suddenly scooped her up from the floor. They were on the sea now, and she was so startled that she froze. Wayne, what are you? He carried her into the room and put her on the bed. Then, before she knew anything, he leaned on her and trapped her in his arms. Why did you change back to your man outfit? She turned her face sideways. What's the matter? You don't like it? He chuckled. Nope. He placed his finger on the corner of her lips and said, it's just that we haven't tried to do that in your man outfit, so why don't we? Cameron hastily closed his mouth as her face turned. Zip it. Waylon stopped teasing her and got up. As he dusted his shirt, he said, that woman is hiding something. Cameron asked curiously. She's hiding something? Yeah, he replied faintly. I suspect that there's an illegal organization on this cruise. I can smell formalin on that woman. When they were boarding the cruise, he noticed a group of people looking for prey among the crowd. One of the men had something in his waist that Waylon suspected to be weapons. Not only that, but the man placed his hand on his waist the whole time. Normal people would not do that, as that was the movement before one drew his or her weapon. Cameron frowned. Formalin? Isn't that a preservative? Waylon caressed her head and said, that's right. It seems like we're in for a wild ride. An illegal organization and formalin. Cameron suddenly remembered something and said, I've heard from my dad before. There are a group of people from Southeast Eurasia who specialize in trafficking human organs. Many private cargo ships or cruises have dealings with them. These people will look for prey, especially young men, on ships. Then, Cameron suddenly looked toward Waylon. She moved away from him and said, oh my. You're their next target. I need to stay away to you. Waylon laughed and stretched his arm to pull her into his arms. You said she's an old woman. Maybe you're their first target. Cameron pushed his arm away. Does this mean that nobody on this cruise is safe? Yeah. I've been observing them the whole time. They don't dare to lay their hands on people with reputations. After all, they'll be in big trouble if someone finds out their deal. They were smart. They only targeted unaware young men of no background who had left their hometown to work. Even though it wouldn't kill those people, missing a kidney and being operated on in a non-medical facility could be harmful. Cameron crossed her arms in front of her chest and said, lucky them. They've run into me this time. Waylon placed his finger on her lips and said, shush. Don't speak. At that moment, they heard a series of footsteps from the corridor. Then, someone knocked on their door. Waylon got up to open the door. It was a crew member of the cruise. He was pushing the meal trolley as he said, hello, this is our cruise ship's meal for all passengers. Please enjoy it. Thank you. Waylon nodded. After the man left, Waylon pushed the meal trolley into the room. Cameron got up, opened the lid, and realized that all of them were Western dishes. Chapter 2398. Cameron looked at the clock. Speak of the devil. Do you think they'd put something in this food? Waylon chuckled. Maybe. Cameron cut the steak and said, anyway, we need to make it look like we've fallen for their trap. Around 1 p.m., the attendant came to collect the dishes. He realized that both Cameron and Waylon had finished the food. Cameron was yawning while watching the TV on the couch, and Waylon was taking a bath. The attendant pushed the dining car away. As he left, he lifted his eyes to look at Cameron before closing the door. At the corner of the corridor, the woman in the mink coat took a drag from her cigarette and asked, did they eat the food? The attendant opened the lid. Yeah, they did? The woman's eyes turned cold as a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Both of them are young. I think we can harvest some good organs from them. A bald, burly man with a tattooed arm walked over. Nusha, is the prey ready? The woman flicked the cigarette ash and replied, don't worry, after all the passengers have gone to rest, we can start. The cruise was slowly moving on the sea. Two attendants pushed two wheelchairs toward Waylon's guest room during the lunch break and knocked on the door first. When they didn't hear any movement from the room, they opened the door using the master key. They looked at each other and nodded when they saw the two people in the room lying unconscious on the bed. They carried Waylon and Cameron on the wheelchairs and pushed them out. They took the freight elevator at the corner of the corridor and came to the basement. Keeping her head low, Cameron opened her eyes slightly and glanced at Waylon. Well, it seems like he's pretty good at pretending to be unconscious. When the door of the elevator opened, she hastily closed her eyes. The attendant pushed them out and said, Nusha, here they are. The yellow bulbs on the ceiling were emitting weak light, and the corridor was dimly lit. Cameron heard a few people coming toward them from the corridor. A man wearing glasses and a white coat came over and lifted their chins. These two fellows are rather handsome. They are totally different from our previous prey. Nasha looked at her watch and said, let's start now. Otherwise, the drug will wear off. The man put on his gloves and grinned. Don't worry. Even if the drug has worn off, they can't get away from us. Push them in. The attendants then pushed both of them into the operating room. Even though the operating room was small, it was well equipped. It was just that the environment was a bit unhygienic. Some of the equipment had patches of rust on them because of the humidity. The man and Nasha walked into the operating room. Both of them gestured at the big man with a tattooed arm behind them to put Waylon and Cameron on the bed. At the moment the man put Waylon on the bed, the latter cracked his eyes open and pinned the man down on the floor by pressing his hand on his neck. Damn it! He's not unconscious. The man with glasses touched the weapon on his waist, but Waylon kicked it away just when he pulled it out. Nasha's face turned pale with fright. Just when she was about to run away, someone closed the door. Cameron stood behind her and said, "Where do you think you're going?" "You." Nasha's voice was trembling, but Cameron pinned her down before she could even say anything. The man with glasses got up from the floor and threw himself at Waylon. Waylon rammed into the rack nearby, and the collision caused some of the bottles on the rack to fall on the floor. Waylon attacked the man's back with his elbow. The man couldn't take it anymore, and just as he loosened his grip, Waylon threw him onto the rack, knocking off the bed in the process. Chapter 2399. The commotion alerted the people waiting outside. They all rushed into the operating room and were stunned. "Get them!" Cameron and Waylon stood back to back as the people surrounded them. The area was too cramped for them to move around freely, but it was good enough to limit their movement. Both of them looked at the crowd, and Cameron asked, "Are you sure you can do it?" Waylon loosened his watch and replied, "Do you want to have a match?" She chuckled. "Sure. Let's see who can put them down in the shortest time." The people's faces turned livid with rage as they listened to their conversation. "Damn it! Are you looking down on us?" Cameron and Waylon replied in chorus, "Yes." That man shouted out of anger, "Let's get them." After the man gave his order, the group threw themselves at them. The cramped operating room was thrown into chaos with so much commotion that even the occupants of the guest rooms could faintly hear sounds coming from under the floor. They all came out of their rooms and asked, "What's happening? Is there a renovation going on? Why is it so noisy?" An attendant came forward and calmed the passengers down. Then, he got someone to inform the captain. An attendant hurriedly walked to the bridge and whispered something next to the captain. The captain put down his cup, and his face sank. "What the hell are they doing? We have no idea either. Maybe something has gone wrong down there. All of the passengers are aware of the commotion, and if someone finds out, then what are you still waiting for? Go check it out right now. We mustn't let other passengers find out what's going on down there," barked the captain, gritting his teeth. Once someone found out what they were doing on this cruise, he would be in big trouble as well. Normally, things like this would not happen, but what happened today? Are those people stupid or something? How can they make such a big commotion? After the attendant left, the captain received a call. The maritime police were approaching them on their patrol boat. When the passengers on the cruise saw so many maritime police officers, they came out of their rooms and instantly had a bad feeling that something must have happened to the cruise. The captain panicked when the maritime police officers asked him to stop the cruise. He gnashed his teeth and sped up while changing the course. The cruise was huge, and the sudden change caused the cruise to tilt toward one side. All of the passengers fell to the floor and shouted in panic. Even the attendants could barely stand still. In the basement, the people who were fighting all lost their balance and fell to one side. Waylon stretched his arm to grab Cameron into his embrace and kicked the man who pounced on them away. Cameron frowned. "What happened?" "I guess the maritime police are here. They're trying to ask the cruise to stop, but the captain probably has a deal with these people, so he's trying to escape," replied Waylon. "Is he mad?" There are hundreds of passengers on this cruise. Does he think he can escape? Is he trying to kill everyone on this cruise? Waylon pushed her away and put down a man who tried to ambush them. He shouted, "Cam, go to the bridge." Cameron dodged an attack from behind. She raised her leg and kicked the man in the head, sending him flying out and into the wall. She turned her head around. "What about you?" Waylon grabbed a man's head in his hand and turned around. "I'll stay here and take care of them." Cameron gnashed her teeth, punched a man away, opened the door, and ran out. A few attendants tried to stop her in the corridor, but she made quick work of them. The captain did not slow the cruise down. Instead, he continued to speed up while the maritime police tailed behind the cruise. Since the captain refused to stop the cruise and there were hundreds of passengers, the maritime police had no choice but to ask for reinforcements from helicopters and the regional police. Chapter 2400. Many passengers were crying out of fear. Nobody knew what was going on. All they knew was that they were in danger. When Cameron arrived on the deck, she saw all the passengers had gathered together, their faces filled with fear. Suddenly, the cruise tilted again, and the passengers screamed. Cameron stumbled and hurriedly held onto the wall. A female attendant was so scared that she sat on the floor and cried. Cameron walked over to her and grabbed her shoulders. "Where is the bridge?" However, she was so scared that she could not speak. Her colleague was comforting the passengers, and when she heard Cameron's question, she said, "I know where the bridge is, but why are you going there? Did something happen?" Cameron walked over to the attendant and said, "We must make the captain stop the cruise immediately. The cruise has already strayed from its original course. The weather in this area of water is unpredictable. If we come across fog, there's a high chance we'll crash into another cruise." The passengers became even more panicked when they heard what Cameron said. "Why is this happening? I don't want to die on the sea. I want to go home." "Silence," shouted Cameron, "it's the captain's problem that the cruise strayed off the course. What we need to do now is try our best to stop the cruise." She took a deep breath and asked calmly, "Is there anyone of you who can con a cruise?" Everyone looked at each other. This was a cruise. Even if they had the license, they were talking about hundreds of people here. What if something went wrong and the cruise sank? Who was going to be responsible for that? At that moment, a trembling middle-aged man stood up and raised his hand. I know how to con a cargo ship." His family beside him said, "What are you doing? This is a cruise, not a cargo. Knowing how to con a cargo doesn't mean that you know how to con a cruise." The middle-aged man lowered his head and said, "But what are we supposed to do? We can't just sit here and wait to die." Cameron grabbed his hand and chimed in. "You don't need to con the cruise. You just need to stop it until the maritime police arrive." The middle-aged man was stunned, and then he nodded. All right, I'll try." Cameron called the female attendant and said, "Bring us to the bridge." The female attendant replied, "Sure. Come with me." Meanwhile, the maritime police received a call. "Eastern Sea Cruise is off course. There will be fog in that area in 10 minutes, so you have to hurry up." The maritime police commander's face sank, and he took a deep breath. "Understood." After he hung up the call, he turned around and said, "Send a fog orange warning signal to Eastern Sea Cruise." One of his men replied, "Given this situation, it will be hard to ask them to stop." "Sir." "Report." Another man rushed inside and said, "Eastern Sea Cruise has turned off its positioning system. We can't see it on the map anymore." The commander massaged his nose. He fell silent for a long while before opening his eyes. "Are the reinforcements here yet?" "Yes. They're currently searching for Eastern Sea Cruise from the sky." The commander gnashed his teeth. "We need to hurry up." Eastern Sea Cruise continued to sail on the sea. They were expected to arrive at Eastern Island in the evening around 5:30 p.m., but now it was already 3:30 p.m., and they were getting farther and farther away from the waters of the East Islands. The female attendant brought Cameron and the middle-aged man to the bridge. However, the door was locked from the inside. She smacked the door and shouted, "Captain, open the door." However, the captain paid her no heed, and the female attendant nearly cried. The door was made of metal, so it was impossible for them to break it open with force. Cameron asked, "Do you have a key?" The female attendant shook her head and said, "We don't have the key. Only the captain has the key."